I really hate this paint by numbers, not because of the outcome. I really like how it looks amazing I think, but the entire process was horrible. So let's go back to 2 months ago when I filmed this intro and I was still happy with this and I was very excited to paint this. Shall we? Hi there, my name is Anne and in this video I'm going to make a paint by numbers painting. As you can see, it's quite large. It doesn't even fit on the page. What exactly are paint by numbers? They are paintings that you have to fill in by number. You get your colors with them, which are each numbered. So each of these little pots has a number written on them and they correspond with a number on the painting. What you get with the set is like you get the canvas and how it's supposed to look like eventually. You also get a reference. So this reference is for if you accidentally paint over a number wrong, you can go look back at it and see what it's supposed to be. This is actually the only paint by numbers painting that I got which has this. I've painted 2 others before and they didn't have this, so I'm curious to see if I will use it or not. Another thing that you get with these paintings are these annoying, very annoying pencils, because this brush is, as you can see, way too big for anything. Yeah, you can use this for this, but you can't really get into like the crux of it, so you're not really going to use it. This brush just breaks off immediately, and this one is kind of okay. And then you also get these things to hang on your canvas if you buy a frame with it. But the problem with this is that you have to buy the frame with it, and the frame itself was like 20 bucks or something. So what I'm going to do is, after I'm done with this painting, I'm going to go to the Action. The Action is like a very cheap store, and I've looked around already and I know that there are paintings which are 50 by 40 centimeters long. So I know that I can just use those canvases, I guess, and then just like take off the existing canvas that's on it and just use a frame. So that's what I'm going to do. And instead of using these brushes, which are horrible, I'm going to use these brushes, which are a little bit less awful. I've used these before in my other paint by numbers that I did, which I didn't film. I also have a bucket of water. And then I'm also going to use like a tissue to, you know, if I have too much water or something like that, I can use that. And that's what I'm going to use, so let's get started. Okay, so I will start this video positively and begin by giving tips and tricks on how to make a paint by numbers work best for you and telling you what you can expect while painting this. After that, I will tell you why I hate this paint by numbers. First off, this will take a long time, like a really long time. I ended up spending close to 43 hours on this painting, and boy was it not worth it. I started this painting in the beginning of February and it's almost the end of March now. 2 months. I spent 2 months on this. But before you're entirely discouraged from starting one, I paint kind of slow, and the reason why it took so long was mostly because of this design. I've done other paint by numbers before and they didn't take this long to complete. This painting just has a lot of small boxes, and I will explain this more later in all the things that I hate about this painting. But normally a paint by numbers doesn't take this long, but it will still take you a while before it's finished. As I said in the intro, I was gonna buy a cheap canvas of the right size and use that to frame this, and I was a bit impatient and did this when I was finished with the first section. I did film it, but this was my first time doing it, and there are a lot of videos out there that are way more informative and way better than me, and I will link a couple of videos that I used as reference so you can watch those and actually learn something. One thing that I do want to mention is I didn't frame it correctly. I know, what a shock. And there wasn't enough tension throughout the painting. So I actually searched a bit online, and a thing that I found was that if you wet the back of the canvas with some water and let that dry correctly, the canvas will tighten itself while it dries and you get more tension. And it actually worked. It was a relief because, oh my god, it was so flimsy in the beginning. And I used the keys that came with it, and keys are super useful. If you don't know what those are, I highly suggest you look those up if you want to frame a canvas. And can I just say a last thing about framing this? How difficult is it to put this on a frame while there's already something on the canvas? It's super difficult to line up properly. Maybe it's just because I'm inexperienced, but this was difficult to do. In the end, I am super proud of myself how I framed this. I just used some thumbtacks and it looks good, I think. Next, you see all those little pots of paints and then the big canvas, and you'll probably wonder, will I have enough paint? The answer is yes. Yes, you will have enough paint. Not one of my paints are empty. This is the paint pot with the lowest amount of paint left. And as you can see, there's still a lot left. Even in the other paint by numbers I've done, there's never not enough paint. You will be fine, you don't have to worry about that. But if you're still worried that you're gonna run out, use the paint that's stuck on the lid first before that dries out. On some pots there will be a lot of paint on there because of how it got shaken during transport. So use that before you actually use the paint that's in the pots. Seeing all those little numbers might be intimidating and maybe you have no clue where to start. What works best for me is I start with the darkest color of my paints and try to paint all the boxes which have that number. Trust me, you're gonna miss some numbers. This is a giant canvas. It's normal that you won't find every single number or that you looked over some. It will happen. And because my black wasn't appearing that much on the canvas, I also did this with my next darkest color, which is a dark brown, and filled in all those numbers. And after that, it's pretty much up to you if you continue this for the rest of the painting or if you'll work in sections. I chose for sections because I thought it would be fun to see each section come to life while I was painting it, and it will be like complete one at a time. As you'll see throughout this video, my sections become bigger and bigger. I started small in the upper right corner, but I realized after I was done with it that I found the section too small, so with each section I painted, they became bigger and bigger. While painting, you work best from dark to light because, for example, I have two whites in this painting. If I colored one number of them in, including the outlines, it's easy to miss when painting with another color that there's already a painted number. And I've accidentally painted a couple of white areas in with the color because I couldn't see them anymore. So work from dark to light. The next tip might be very obvious to some, but it wasn't to me while painting, so I'm gonna mention it anyway. Paint over the outlines. I know this might be very obvious to some, but I found that I had to tell myself a couple of times, hey, color in the outlines. You forgot to color in the outlines, and do this. This paint by numbers has orange outlines, so they're a little bit more subtle than other paint by numbers, which most of the time have black outlines. So they were a lot easier to cover than other paint by numbers. So I have to give them that. If you choose to leave the outline on the painting, it will look, in my opinion, a little less neat. So I find that if you actually paint over the outlines, it will look more like a cohesive painting and actually look like a painting that you've done. And if you do decide to paint over the outlines, do it with a darker color. If you're painting it with, for example, a black, paint all the surrounding outlines in, because if there's a lighter color next to it, like white, it's easier to cover it up with the black than with the white. And that brings me to my next point. Don't expect too much from the paints. They are cheap paints. They're not gonna be top-notch quality. Some paints might be opaque. Most of the time it's gonna be the darker ones. But a lot of paints will be either a little bit transparent or a lot transparent. Like for example, my number 10 paint was a bright pink, but oh boy, it would not cover up the number on the canvas. Multiple layers were needed to get that number 10 covered. Some of the paints might feel like actual paint, but for other paints it will feel like you're painting with Play-Doh. I will expand on that later. For all of the flaws this thing has, it is a nice way to spend your time. It's really quite relaxing. When I wasn't frustrated with it, I really enjoyed myself doing this. And again, most of my problems are with this particular paint by numbers painting. With the others that I've made, I realized this is a fun thing to do and it gets your mind off things. With that being said, I do suggest you listen to something while painting. Maybe listen to some music or an audiobook. What I did most of the time is listen to podcasts and one particular YouTuber. So for the podcast that I listen to, it's Philip DeFranco's podcast, A Conversation With, and Simply Nailogical's podcast with her and Ben. They're both so fun to listen to, especially the interviews of DeFranco. You get to have another view of some YouTubers that I thought I wouldn't have. And the one thing that kept me company the most during this painting is The Right Opinion. I have watched so many The Right Opinion videos. Like, all my entire YouTube history is just The Right Opinion videos, nothing else. You're basically just listening to essays on different YouTubers for an hour. It's super fun. I like him a lot. He makes amazing videos. The last tip that I have is take breaks while doing this. Listening to those podcasts made me easily forget how much time went by. But for your precious eyes, take breaks regularly. For me, even an hour was too much for my eyes. I would look away for a couple minutes during my time painting just so that my eyes could rest. I wouldn't paint longer than an hour at a time without breaks. It's not good for you. It's also not comfortable for your back. I was hunched over a lot because I don't have a painter's easel, and boy do I want one. But that's besides the point. If I painted for longer periods of time, my back really began to hurt. And as soon as that happened, I realized, okay, time to quit. My body is telling me that I'm done. So those were all my tips on how to get through this and what worked best for me. So now let's get to the parts I hate about this painting. And again, I just want to clarify, most of my complaints come from this particular paint by numbers. Not all paint by numbers have these issues. It's just something to keep in mind while I ramble all the things I don't like about it. My other paint by numbers also had some issues, but they were more enjoyable because I didn't have these particular problems. So let's get right into it. First thing first, the paints. I know I mentioned it before, and that's something you're gonna have with all paint by numbers. The quality is shit. Like, there's no way around it. And for the price I paid, I don't expect top quality, but I do expect them to work. Like, look at this. My number one paint was red, and it was just rubber. I could literally take the paint out of the pot and play with it. It was unusable. My solution to this was adding some water, and I mixed it up a little bit, closed the pot, painted a little bit more, did again, added some water, and repeat until eventually I got a working paint. Do you remember how I mentioned that I had a Play-Doh-like paint? Yeah, that was this paint. I don't know how to describe it because it was just weird. You know those videos those artist YouTubers did like a year ago, I think, where they picked Play-Doh and made it into paint and then painted with it? That's this. It was like that. And if you have seen those videos, it was awful. Like, the best way I could describe it is that I had to pick up a blob of paint with my paintbrush and then blobbed it onto the canvas and had to smear it out. It was awful. And another thing about the paints, this painting took a long time, as I said. So when you're working on the big section, your paint pots will be open a lot. And so for some paints, over those 2 months, the paints began to dry out to that rubber stayed like the red. And I was like, no. Why is this happening? But most of the time it was just like the top layer. So there was still usable paint underneath it. So it was eventually fine. I just took my paintbrush sometimes and I would like poke in the pot to get some paint and there would just come nothing out. It was so annoying. I have to mention though, I don't know if this is because of the technique I used in which I painted in a section at a time. I don't know if this would or wouldn't happen if you painted every single color in one by one, because then technically you're only using that paint once. So I don't know if this is just a side effect of the way that I use these paints or if this is going to happen to all the paints eventually. And then we go to the biggest problem I had with this painting, the canvas itself. So a paint by numbers painting comes with a canvas which has each number and outline printed on them. And for some reason there were so many problems with this design. As you can see, there are a lot of individual tiny areas, which is one of the reasons why it took so long, because all the boxes were so small, like annoyingly small. So small sometimes that you couldn't even read the number that was printed on it. That's how small it was. And other areas were big, like gigantic areas. The water at the bottom of this painting, for example. Such a big area to fill in. So you think, yeah, this is gonna go fast. Well, I have to disappoint you. No, it's not gonna go fast. Those took the longest, because they take such weird branches and they're like twisted all the way, so you can't fill it in one piece. You have to constantly look out that you don't accidentally color one outside of the lines, and two, don't accidentally color in like those tiny other areas surrounding it. And I don't know why, but for some reason you have this big gigantic area of one color and they just put one tiny little number in it, like in the outer corner of that area. Just one. That big blue color at the bottom only had one number in it, in like this tiny place on the outside of it. And the number was painted in a tiny font. So you're constantly searching for that number that is super hard to find. And then when you do find it, you realize that it has so many branches that go the completely opposite way. And that's annoying, because when you paint one area and go to one branch and leave the other one alone, it's difficult to see if that branch is still from the same area or if it's a different color. And because you know that the number only appears once every box, you have to go look through that branch if it's part of the same color or if it's a different color. So, do you see why it took so long? I was most of the time searching for numbers and not actually painting. Another two things about the numbers. The big areas, as I mentioned, had like small numbers printed on it. And then for some reason, the smaller areas next to it had these gigantic numbers printed on it. Like, it didn't make sense. And the second thing, sometimes numbers were printed slightly crooked, so half of the number was out of the area. So I accidentally painted over some numbers because they were printed almost completely out of their area. It was annoying. The last thing that I want to say why I hate this is the reference that I came with it. I mentioned in the beginning that this is the first painting which has this, and it did come in handy when I had painted over a number, because then I could look it up. One thing that wasn't really handy was that it was an exact copy of the canvas, so any mistake on the canvas was also on the reference paper. For example, some areas just didn't have a number in them. Like, what's the point of a paint by numbers painting if there isn't a number? And this is entirely the fault of this design. It had many very small areas that would connect one bigger box to the other. But because they are so small, you often painted over these like corridors because the paint that you got was bad and hard to control at times. So you suddenly have two separate areas and you know only one has a number in it. Like, sometimes those connecting corridor thingies were just a simple line because they were compressed so much that you couldn't see the corridors and you just had to know that that line was a connection between two sections. So I had to look at my reference page a lot throughout this painting, which hindered my workflow, and it made everything go so much slower. So those were my main complaints about this paint by numbers. And if I'm being honest, I really like the outcome, even with all those issues. Like, compared to the other two that I did, this did turn out the best. Will I ever do another one? Probably not. The thing is, I look at this painting now and I just think, I wish I had made this myself. So as I said, I like the results. I'm done with the process of a paint by numbers, and I want to try like actually painting a landscape like this. Again, this is a fun activity to do, to relax, but just maybe don't do this one. So here is my finished painting. As I said, I really like the result. I hope you liked this video. I had a lot of fun making this, and I hope that I will see you in the next one. Bye!